right, welcome to week 4. This week we're going to be covering populism and the Hector-Olean model. We are going to do that with a Danny Rodrik blog and Krugman chapter 5. Okay, so I'm just doing a slightly different setup today. So we've got a little monitor here, and I'm going to go back and forth between this and the book just so we can look at some of the different graphs. All right, so let's get started. So first we're going to talk through the Rodrik piece on populism and trade. So populism tends to be something that is anti-establishment, the people versus the elite, and it tends to be opposed to economics and globalization, and has an authoritarian stance in governance. Okay, so what do those things mean? Well, anti-establishment, obviously, it's against the things that currently exist. It's kind of populist, meaning that it's popular among the people, and it's rebelling against the elite. And these movements tend to have a stance that is anti-economics and anti-globalization. So we're kind of thinking through that a little bit in this piece by Rodrik. He gives a little historical background, showing the first era of populism resulting from the gold standard era, where there was a decline in world agriculture prices in the 1870s and 80s. This led into an increase in agricultural tariffs. The Chinese Exclusion Act from 1882, and then the Japanese were not fully excluded, but there were laws that limited their immigration in 1907 into the U.S., and then the famous Cross of Gold speech that was given by William Jennings Bryan, basically saying, are we really going to stick to this gold standard, right? So it was all this backlash against these things. Now, one of the things that Rodrik brings out is that economics should prepare us for this backlash. Trade economics predicts losers, right? So because of this, we should be aware that there will be a redistribution that takes place with trade. That is something that is predicted by our models. We've already talked about it in the prior models, and we'll talk about it in this week's models. So there are indeed net gains as liberalization sets things free. Society is going to improve. However, one of the things that Rodrik points out is that as we liberalize more and more, and our changes are getting smaller and smaller, the positive impact of liberalization is diminishing. So our gains here are diminishing, but the distortions are linear, right? So we continue to see the same kind of negative change in distribution, although our gains are getting smaller and smaller. So we've also talked about the fact that these distortions don't just come from trade. They come from all kinds of things. They come from tech improvement. They come from change in preferences in terms of the consumer. So why is it that trade distortions are so contentious? Well, one of the things that Rodrik points out, he talks a little bit about the 2008 crises and the globalized system. Right? So the 2008 crises definitely hit the whole world. This impact from the fall in the housing market, right, in the United States. So this crash that took place in the United States financial institution impacted the whole world because of this globalized financial system. One of the things that happens when we liberalize capital accounts is it leads to a decline in labor's share of income, and the tax burden is shifted to the immobile factor, which is labor. So we have this situation where labor and the people, if you will, the lower groups, the non-elites, are going to be impacted negatively by it. One thing to keep in mind, though, when we liberalize capital accounts, anyone that has a 401k or any money invested in the stock market is going to benefit from that. So let's say you're labor at GM and you're working at GM, your retirement account is a capital account. So the liberalization of capital accounts is one of the things that allows for retirement accounts to grow and expand because they can be invested anywhere in the world. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. Just because your job is labor doesn't mean all your income is from labor. Your retirement account is probably, based on foreign assets or somewhat foreign assets, and is definitely a capital account. Okay. So that he closes with the left versus right distinction between left populism and right populism. Left populism is focuses more on the income and social class dynamic, so really more of that, like, kind of lower groups versus the elites. So you can see like a social class, you can see Marxism in that, right? And then on the right, it's more ethno and national centric. And this tends to result from immigration issues, refugees, where people feel like their nationality is being threatened by foreigners. Whereas the social class impact is things that take place with trade and finance and so forth.